You're with Joseph Arthur and his Technicolor Dreamcast on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
For me, it's, thoughts versus presence. It could be, down to that. If I'm present, if I'm in the here and now, I feel like I'm with God. I feel like God is consciousness. I don't know what you think about manifestation stuff. A lot of times people think that's demonic, but, the Neville Goddard says God is the human imagination. But it's interesting because I don't think you can do that from the jump. And that's what I mean, like the overcoming of the self. Why were we given these selves, this development of this ego that is our thoughts? And I guess our battle is not with flesh and blood, but with principalities, right? Principalities exist as thoughts in our mind. That's the interesting battle I'm talking about. Like, what gives? Why didn't we just get born into presence? And maybe that's the story of Genesis, and Eve took the apple, and that's where all the thoughts and all the knowledge of good and evil came in and made this test happen where we have to overcome the self. But like, that's what why do you think it's set up that we have to overcome the self? Why weren't we just born into perfect presence and knowing God, and we could all just bliss out on a cosmic love joyride?
I would have rather gone that route.
Right? I mean, like, what's
yeah,
with
right.
the
I mean,
test,
I'm not
like,
disagreeing
first
with
thing
you.
I'm going to say to God is like, dude, what was with that test, bro? I mean, I'm glad I got there. But like, couldn't we have skipped the middleman? I mean, if like I have to overcome this ego, then why give me the ego in the first place?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm gonna be anchored by the Word of God, right? So I'm because it has stood the test of time, both for me experientially and from a historical standpoint. And so I'm gonna go to the very first words in the very first book of the Bible, right? That we were created in God's image and likeness. This is why we ended off the last segment with like, who is Jesus? Is he God? Is he the Son of God? And I answered yes, right? Because this is where the doctrine of the Trinity comes into play. That God was this self-existent being who eternally has demonstrated himself or represented himself within the personages of three distinct individual persons, right? And so he has this love relationship within himself of submission and accommodation and reverence and respect within himself. So God doesn't need anything. And it says that we were created in his image. And so if we're created in God's image, yes, we're going to be probably a multi-part being, body, soul, spirit, however you want to see that breakdown. But ultimately that we're created in his image to love. And love is about sacrifice, and love is about surrender. And so the reason why we're given the ego is so that we have the choice ultimately to lay down the ego so that we can submit and surrender to one another just in the same way. I mean, far before there was ever sin, God was in submission to himself, within himself, through the triune reality of God.